Hello, my name is Tony. Pleased to make your acquaintance. Just about every video I upload to this channel gets restricted or demonetized. Seems to be a purely arbitrary thing, meaning my only recourse is to refer it for a manual review and wait for a response. In fairness, 99% of those responses are favourable and the restrictions are promptly lifted. Which is lovely, great, but leaves me with questions and stuff to consider. Is it my style and methods and the types of films I review in the way that I review them that is to blame? Which leads me to this point, which is something of an experiment, and I'm going to tell you how it's going to be. The Train Robbers is a straightforward action-adventure western. It has no explicit violence in it, no bloodshed, gore, no profane or obscene language, no sex, no nudity, no perverse behaviour, doesn't even have a singular villain you can hate or strongly dislike. There is no clear racism, overt sexism, discrimination, challenging behaviour, or anything anyone might term morally corrupting. There are no politics at play. It is not controversial in any way by the standards of the time in which it was made. Even today, it's a struggle to find anything that would conceivably trigger anyone. I'm sure there are things, and I'm equally sure someone will comment on them in the fullness of time. But that's fine. See? Look how reasonable I'm being. I intend to review it as pleasantly as I can manage, with no swearing, no bad language, no satire or controversy, no deliberate flaker baiting or woke provoking or ranting, or taking the mickey, or being hypercritical of anyone or anything. This will be the most vanilla review I can possibly do. Now I know someone will be offended by something because someone always is, especially if that someone is on the lookout to find something to be offended about, and I can't help that. All I can do is mind my manners and strike up the bland. So here goes. Whilst I might not feel all that kindly disposed to John Wayne as a human being in the real world, whilst I might not agree with his politics and his views, as an action hero, as an artist, as an actor, for a time when I was a kid, he was my #1 screen hero. I love a great many of his films, his performances in them, his screen persona, and even today I gravitate towards watching him when the opportunity arises. I don't have a problem in his case in separating the artist and the art from the individual person. I don't think he was a man given easily to change. When the spaghetti westerns terraformed the 60s landscape into a different type of revisionist geography, Wayne stuck by the traditional types of westerns he had always made. When the most seismic of revisionist westerns, Sam Peckinpah's The Wild Bunch, rewrote the rulebook in 1969, mostly by breaking all the rules in it, Wayne shifted focus only fractionally. The Cowboys, Cahill and Big Jake were more violent and direct, taking serious themes a little more seriously, allowing for some revisionism in style and content. Big Jake especially went in for more bloodshed and barbarism. However, old habits die hard or not at all, and Chisholm, Rio Lobo, Rooster Cogburn and the Lady, and the subject of this video, the Train Robbers, played things the old way. Maybe Wayne thought there was a place and a market for both the neo-realistic and the old school, but this was the 70s, and the trad westerns were looking a bit anachronistic and out of sync with the cultural gestalt of the times. Fittingly, his last movie, Don Siegel's The Shootist, composed a poignant character amalgamated from the many he had played over the years, embodying those portrayals in John Book, an elderly gunslinger dying of cancer. Wayne himself was dying from the same thing. It was a fine role and film to finish his career on, and either ironically or appropriately, depending on where you stand, not really a traditional western. Book has outlived his time, and all he has left to do is die the best death he can in a way of his own choosing, and he won't be going quietly, pilgrims. Let's put that behind us though and hitch a ride with the Train Robbers. Before we go any further, I'd like to take the opportunity to remind you of the importance of subscribing in order to maintain the continued growth, health and welfare of the channel. Even more important, if you're able to do so, is to hit the thanks button and make a very welcome contribution to keeping this channel up and running and promoting the production of new content. Many thanks, much appreciated. Now back to our main feature. The film opens in a dusty pit stop for trains, the kind of place you'd call a one-horse town if only it looked like it could afford a horse. 3 men are waiting for the train to arrive, specifically for a passenger on it, someone called Lane. The men are Grady, Rod Taylor, Jesse, Ben Johnson, and Ben, Bobby Vinton. Soon they're joined by 2 others, Calhoun, Christopher George, and Turner, Jerry Gatlin. The train arrives and Lane, John Wayne, disembarks with a woman in tow, Mrs. Lowe, Anne Margaret. It transpires that Lane, Grady, and Jesse are old friends who fought in the Civil War together. Ben tagged along with them later. They're sort of hired gun stroke adventurers. Grady recruited Calhoun and Turner to help with whatever job they're going to be undertaking. Lane doesn't know them, but immediately there's some friction. The deal is this: Mrs. Lowe's husband was a train robber, and he, along with several others, hit an express carrying $500,000 in gold. The gold is hidden somewhere only he knows, or knew rather, because he got backshot in a bordello and is no longer sucking oxygen. However, before his inauspicious demise, he told his wife the whereabouts. Lane has persuaded her to let him and his crew retrieve the gold, which they then intend to turn into the railroad for a $50,000 reward. Mrs. Lowe doesn't want the shame of her husband's activities to affect their young son growing up, and returning the gold, she feels, is a method of achieving that. The only problem being that the survivors of her husband's gang and several other all too willing rapscallion bandoleros are going to be on their trail. As Mrs. Lowe doesn't fully trust Lane, she insists on going along to guide him to the location of the gold rather than tell him specifically where it is. And so it goes. They journey to Mexico into the desert, locating an abandoned rail route at the end of which is a wrecked locomotive where the gold is stashed. A mysterious and dapper-looking stranger, Ricardo Montalban, has been following them all the way, and a posse of 20 outlaws have caught up. Outnumbered, they're gonna have to defend the gold and shoot their way out and back to civilization against the odds. Can they make it? Well, yeah, in this type of movie they can. The Train Robbers was written and directed by old hand Burt Kennedy. Kennedy had scripted 5 of the 7 Randolph Scott, Bud Botticher Western collaborations of the 1950s, which, along with those of Jimmy Stewart and Anthony Mann, transcended their B-movie origins to become the more profoundly psychological forerunners of the 60s revisionist offerings. When he started directing in the 60s, most of his westerns were lighter and more comedic in tone, such as The Good Guys and the Bad Guys with Robert Mitchum and George Kennedy, and the John Wayne Kirk Douglas actioner The War Wagon. Dominic Frontier, who had composed the resoundingly doomy soundtrack for Eastwood's first Hollywood western, Hang 'em High, provided a rousing and familiar sounding score for the Train Robbers. The unfeasibly prolific western movie lensman William H. Clothier delivered the visuals on what was to be his last film. The look and sound are therefore hard to fault. Wayne's character, Lane, and Anne Margaret's Mrs. Lowe share the same names as those of Wayne and Geraldine Pages in his popular 50s 3D western Hondo, a cool little nod to a classic. I paid to see it because it was a John Wayne film, and it had the added bonus of Rod Taylor in the cast. What's odd is that Taylor is billed alongside Wayne and Anne Margaret in the pecking order, but has a much smaller role and less screen time and dialogue than Ben Johnson. And I find myself prevaricating here because I'm struggling to find anything interesting to say about it. Of all the John Wayne westerns I've seen, it's the one that left the least impression. There are some well-handled action scenes in which the good guys fend off the anonymous bad guys when they attack, plenty of gunfire and outlaws falling off horses, but ultimately little in the way of tension or suspense. The finale, back in the no-horse town, has an explosive punchline, but it feels like a case of too little too late. Anne Margaret is beautiful and ever alluring, but the scene in which Wayne plies her with booze in order to get her to reveal the location of the gold, which is supposed, I imagine, to be adorable and funny, simply falls flat. When her character later hints at the potential for romance to the Duke, he gruffly informs her,
"I got a saddle that's older than you are, Mrs. Lowe."
So no sexual impropriety here, folks, or age-inappropriate liaisons ensuing. No, sir. Duke shuts that trail right down. The only aspect approaching traditional Western sexism is the suggestion that Mrs. Lowe dress in a tightly fitting shirt to make her stick out in all the right places. No, ain't nothing sexual intended. It's just so their pursuers will be able to recognize her from a distance as the woman who knows where the gold is, and will be less likely to shoot her. It's for her own good. A likely story story perhaps, but I bought it. Ben Jonson was a key member of Peckinpah's Wild Bunch. In The Train Robbers, his main purpose is to relate anecdotes and homespun philosophy about honour, duty and friendship, and the virtues of Duke Wayne's character. Rod Taylor hacks out some musings on ageing, whilst Christopher George sees his initial antipathy towards the Duke evaporate in a misty cloud of near-hero worship as he comes to understand and respect the man. In the footnote scene, our heroes see Mrs. Lowe off on the outbound train with the gold, and they all agree that she should keep the reward money to build a life for her and her son, little Matt. Ah. As the train is about to leave, Montalban turns up and introduces himself as a Pinkerton agent working for the railroad. He drops the bombshell that our backshot train robber wasn't married, and Mrs. Lowe is in fact a prostitute called Lily, with whom he shared the location of the gold just before his removal from this world. If they think her intention is to turn it in, they should think again. Well, it's all been nice and pleasant up until now. Lane and the boys, notably none of whom got killed on their adventure, which is rare. I think Bobby Vinton got shot in the foot, give chase on horseback. When the question is posed to Lane, where are you going? He responds with,
Where the hell you suppose? Rob a train!
The point at which the film should perhaps begin, but it isn't. It's the point where it ends. I don't dislike The Train Robbers. Wayne looks a touch infirm, yet maintains that towering screen presence and monolithic charisma that even time and illness could not wither. The music and the visuals are fine and engaging, and the action scenes involving enough in a less than energized and visceral way. Despite its lack of vitality and drive, it's an easy watch, and one I return to when I feel like an undemanding Wayne flick to coast through. In honesty, Big Jake is more my speed though, and if you want to see the Duke strutting his stuff more abrasively and with more effect in the twilight years of his life and career, that and The Shootist would be my essential recommendations. Respectful thanks for your time and attention. It is my sincere hope that you can find it in your tender loins to click upon like or didn't like, leave a much welcome comment of any nature, perhaps visit my Patreon page, or alight upon the thanks button below and make a gracious contribution that I will invest in good works for the future of humanity. I will endeavour to return with something else just as soon as I am able. Farewell for now, my brethren. Right, well, if that's not vanilla enough, I don't know what is.